Welcome to the Business Podcast, where we interview professionals across all industries. Hey, what's going on, everyone? This is Iman, and today we have Jason Sherman, founder of TapRm. Jason, glad to have you here today. How are you?
Good. Thanks for having me, Eamon.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Jason, I always like to ask this question. What's something you like to share about yourself and your background that people can't easily find on Google?
Ooh, that's a good question. The big one is I was a very competitive ultimate frisbee player. I think that came out of nowhere. Very weird sports like soccer
Awesome.
with a frisbee.
Oh, it's an
Uh,
awesome sport. I've tried.
yeah,
It's difficult. It's
it's
difficult. You need a lot of
difficult.
skill.
I know. I wasn't quite good enough to play a real varsity sport in college, so this was the next best thing, and I fell in love with it. It's like the semi-athletes get to compete to be the next best thing, so I was into it, and it
Yeah.
really kind of led me down a fun path. At least I had a good time in college because I got to play a sport.
For sure, for sure. Um, so to kick into it, founder of TapRm, I'm sure you have a lot of experience as an entrepreneur. What's one piece of wisdom you can share based on your experience so far?
Wow. So actually, this is my first startup by far. I'm a lawyer by background and Harvard Law School, and then went to a big law firm, and then worked at a big beer company, Anheuser Busch InBev, and was a lawyer there, and was looking at a lot of startup deals for them and their venture arm, and then started my first company. So I've learned a lot. If you ask like what's the big learning, I think the one thing that really struck me by most surprise was fundraising. I think I wasn't quite prepared for the grind of fundraising, and that one really took me for a ride, because on the other side, when you're on the investment side, you see all these startups raising tons of money. You think it's so easy. You don't quite
Yeah.
realize in the background just how much goes into getting those deals done.
Oh, yeah. I can imagine. Um, in terms of this year, fair to say the whole world has experienced a lot. What would you say is one takeaway that you've learned from this year that's impacted your outlook personally or professionally?
Yeah, I mean, this year was a wild year, and I think running a small company that had to navigate through a a jolt to the system like the global pandemic was, and the Black Lives Matter protests, and the wild election. It was a wild year. I know we had an explosion in sales in late March when COVID restrictions came in. We went from 20 grand in sales in February to 800 grand in online sales in May. So we had absolute.
Congrats.
Thank you. I mean, it was great, but at the same time, I don't think we were ready. Definitely we're not ready. Nobody was ready. We kept going. We kept pouring into it. The team worked all-nighters to keep us not missing a single day of operations.
Yeah.
And then things just started flatlining and then growing again. And it was just very unpredictable. So the big learning that we had was prepare for nothing. I prepare for anything and prepare for nothing. Just
Uh,
almost 2 weeks before the pandemic started, we prepared for like 2 weeks for a big strategy session with our board and our advisors about our big 2020 strategy. And within about 14 days, the whole thing was tossed out the window. So I think the big learning was don't over prepare when you're running a small company or getting it off the ground. It's going to be chaos. You don't know what's going to happen. This year proved that. Every few months, something totally different can happen. So I think just remain flexible and never like cement your ideas too far ahead of time. Like get ready to go at any given time.
oh yeah, big time. So, what would you say has been one of your biggest challenges in your career so far, given your
Oh wow.
background and what you were doing up until now?
Yeah, there's a lot of good challenges. I think what I didn't quite realize was, like I was saying, I was a lawyer before, which is a pretty like regimented path to not success, but it's set for you. You go to law school, you go to a law firm, you work hard, you become a partner, maybe you go become a judge. Those paths are very take advantage of those. I think I just didn't really think about how nice it is that there's a path out there. And if you're a banker or if you're an accountant or if you're a nurse, you have a
Yeah.
path for success. I think being an entrepreneur, I didn't quite realize that there's no playbook. Like you wake up every day and you actually don't know what to do. There's a million things you could do, but
Yeah.
playbook hasn't really been written. You could hop on podcasts like this, you could read a lot of books, but at the end of the day, everyone has a different opinion. Everyone's going to give you different advice. I almost forgot the question now, but the real struggle for me, the hardest thing for me was really writing that playbook in my whole career was, even to this day, is waking up and prioritizing what works. It's really, really hard when things are the most chaotic. We're running out of money, which we've had a couple times now, or the pandemic, things are exploding. We don't know what to do. How do we keep it up? Do we shut things down? When things are the most chaotic, that's when that playbook would be so nice. There's someone to tell you this is the path to take to save yourself, save the company. And that's been the hardest thing is designing a playbook during chaos is the hardest thing I've ever had to do professionally. Luckily right now where it's slow growth, like kind of consistency. I'm just waiting for the next chaos moment where I know that is professionally going to be very, very difficult to write for the whole team, for the company, for myself. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I like the way you worded it. Designing a playbook during chaos. I mean, if there was a book called that, I'd buy it right now on Amazon. Maybe you should write
Giving me
that.
a good idea. Yeah, it's a good idea.
Yeah. So, what would you say was a particular or series of inflection points that became a game changer for you in terms of your path and your ascent?
Oh, it's a really good question. So one was getting into law school was a huge one. I was deciding between a normal business career out of college or a consulting career. And I got into Harvard Law School and I was like, you know what? It's a good school. Obviously, it's going to be an easy path, a nice umbrella. And I did. And I actually loved it. I had a great time there. I learned a lot. It really, I was kind of not a wild child, but like I just didn't care about school all that much in college. So I wasn't really paying attention to like writing courses or math or anything that important. And when I got to law school, I really was surrounded by some great academics who really pushed me to the bounds of my own ability to think critically and my own ability to write critically, which was not a skill set I really had. And that
Mm.
pushed me then into corporate America. My first job was in corporate law, which again was another big inflection point. I was around billionaires. I was around these huge organizations, seeing how they structured themselves to be successful, seeing how important the bottom line was to these people, and like the every few weeks of shareholder meetings and kicking out dividends. That was an inflection point of like an eye-opening moment. Like, whoa, big America is very money focused, and at the academic level, it's very society focused. And having that back and forth just kind of put me in a nice path to thinking about the whole world in a broader sense. And then the luckiest thing that ever happened to me was I was in a bar with an old college friend. And he said, "Hey, I'm joining the VC arm for Anheuser Busch InBev. They're looking for a lawyer. Would you like to join?" And I jumped right on the opportunity. And honestly, from that moment, my entire career has sort of built from that. I've become sort of the subject matter expert in beer and law and e-commerce, all from that one happenstance discussion in a bar. And the building blocks that got me to that discussion are really what created it all. So, I always tell people never turn down that coffee. I still to this day, podcasts, I never turn down anything because you really never know where that one conversation that'll set off your career in another direction positively will come from. And that was the one meeting in the bar. So
Look at that. That's a really cool story right there. Yeah, I was kind of when you shared a bit about your background in corporate law uh, for that organization. It made sense to me that you probably had some spark, and you're like, I want to be like one of these startups I'm reviewing. So that's really cool. So with all that in mind, what's getting you excited these days when you're waking up, going throughout the day?
yeah, I'm excited for the world to come back. I mean, I'm sure everyone is, but in the beer space, just having people back at the bars and restaurants that we used to sell a ton to, having the big events. My job used to be pretty fun. I used to go to breweries and beer festivals, and the beer conferences were
Yeah.
full of people hanging out. And all of a sudden, I'm living my life on Zoom, like everyone else. But it's a very different role, and I am very much looking forward to it. I mean, both from a business perspective, TapRm, we're much bigger than we were pre-pandemic, and the opportunities in the bars and restaurants are huge, but also personally, I'm sure everyone else here too, excited just to go have that beer again with your old friend that you haven't seen in 2 years now, because of the pandemic. I think I'm most looking forward to that. That's getting me going in the morning, is building up that excitement for a few months from now.
Oh, for sure, for sure. Um, so, if you had to look back on some of the best advice you've ever received, what stands out, or what first comes to mind to you?
Oh, best advice. I think the one that always stands out for me is I was told never to take anyone too seriously. And it came from a partner that I was just chatting with at an
Mm,
event. And I asked him a very similar question. And he said he learned in as many years that like everyone's sort of full of shit. And I think that's probably right. I think everyone, they say a lot and they don't always mean a lot. And to this day, I'll talk to people and they'll tell me stuff and I'll just kind of be like, hey, frankly, what do you really mean? Like, what are you trying to say? What do you actually know about this? And I've taken that advice to really mean like ask a lot of questions. And and so I ask everyone a ton of questions. And that's always got me here. It's how I started TapRm. I was asking questions about, why are there only distributors? Why are there only retailers? And no one really had a good answer. And you start parsing through that. And you say, why are none of the distributors selling online? And you ask the question. If no one has an answer for you, it means no one's thought about it, or that person hasn't thought about it. You keep asking. And so never take anyone seriously. They usually don't know what they mean. And so if you don't take them seriously, ask them a ton of questions. And if they can prove to you that they know what they're talking about, go to the next thing. Ask a lot of questions of people because they often haven't thought that hard about these subjects. And if you push them to, either they will themselves and come back with really great answers, or you can start to find holes and opportunities and ways for yourself to like grow into them. So this is big advice that I received from a partner a long time ago.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, asking good questions. That's one of the golden skills to have for sure. What would you say has been a mentor who's recently impacted your life, or who comes to mind, and how have
Yeah.
they impacted it?
There's one advisor mentor who has had the most impact on my startup, but also me personally, which is just this guy named Danny Saltzman. He works for a distributor called Breakthrough Beverage, and I randomly met him right when I was starting TapRm, just right in the beginning. We were having lunch, and he was just fell in love with the idea and me. And he has been the only person out there that has had a massive impact on our business that isn't actually working here. He just, from that moment on, he was introducing me to everyone he knows. He brought on all these angel investors. He would advise me every week, just calls me out of the blue and for nothing in return. He gets nothing out of it. He literally is just a good Samaritan that wants to help. At this point, I've introduced him to a lot of startups and a lot of VCs. He's really built a network of amazing people. He's grown a lot, but to this day, he'll call me out of the blue and just like, I had an idea. Let me tell you. And sometimes they're silly, sometimes they're great, but those are the best. I think those are the only advisors people need, or ones that aren't in it for the shares or because you have monthly meetings with them that are scheduled. It's the ones that are just going to be thinking about you on the weekend, or the ones that are generally in it because they're good people and they're connectors and they like helping other people out. And I think I would say, like, I would hope everyone can find someone like that when they're building a startup or working in their own company. Someone's just there to help them, not because HR tells them to be your mentor, but because they really want to help you out and help your career progress or your company progress.
Oh yeah, definitely. Um, that's a really cool story. It seems like right when you were starting, you met the right kind of person, and you forged a really good relationship throughout the way. What would you say has been a habit of yours that helps drive some of the success you've been realizing lately?
Ooh, a habit of mine, something I do regularly. I would go back to the asking a lot of questions. I think that's
Okay.
come in a lot of handy, especially in chaos. But I think other habits, I'm a big believer in keeping things light and speaking in open jargon. I don't use acronyms. I try not to use like industry terms. And it's very easy in e-commerce, especially. You go to CPCs and LTVs, and you can start going crazy. Or in beer, you could talk about, Czech hops versus Saaz hops and like what different ingredients go into the Kolsch for the lager. But like, you don't need to. And I think the accessibility that I try and speak with and I instill on the teams. One of our big cultural values is not to use acronyms and jargon. Allows anyone to access our industry and access what we're building. And it allows for new people who join the team to input on day one instead of spending 6 months learning an acronym handbook, which I kid you not, on my first day of AB InBev, they handed me a 200-page acronym book that had acronyms from the 50s that no one had used. I remember one was BLADE in there. It was Black Leaders Achieving Diversity Through Education. And I asked them, like, okay, who are the Black leaders? Like, oh, we haven't had any of those in 25 years. They're like, why do we have an acronym in the acronym book for BLADE? It makes no sense. So these things are, I really push the teams to simplify language, simplify what you're talking about. And when you're on speaking publicly, be more accessible to people. And it really helps the success, not for me personally, but for the teams that you're building, because they can all input and all give their feedback.
Yeah, that's actually an idea I don't hear too often. Making things simple, even when you're working internally, it makes it much more easy for onboarding people who have talent and want to put it to good use, but they don't necessarily have that subject matter expertise. So yeah, that's really unique. Thanks for sharing that. What would you recommend to people who want to do what you've done or what you're doing now, whether it's working for an organization as a corporate lawyer, going to law school, starting a business? What comes to mind first, and what would you recommend to them?
Yeah, I would say, I think a lot of people, entrepreneurship happens in a lot of ways. People fall into it for a lot of reasons. I have found a lot of success having had worked in an industry at the highest level and understanding the nuances and details that go into that industry.
Yeah.
So I recommend to most people, if they want to be an entrepreneur in a space, let's say they really love music, I highly recommend, if it does require, grinding it out as an investment banker covering the music industry, or if you need to go work at Universal Music as a marketing manager, or if you need to do that, I highly recommend going to the people that are doing it the best, making a ton of money doing it, and finding out what they're not doing well, or just completely ignoring because they're behind the times and moving too slow. And so I generally tell people, you don't have to go to law school, but like, get the education you need to, or go work in the companies you need to, in order to find the hole in the industry that you can not exploit, but at least grow upon and turn into something amazing. And that's literally because that was my experience. But I also think you come with such confidence to your startup at that point and to the world around you, and people think of you as that expert, that everything else just kind of falls into place. And you just end up learning more and more about that whole, about the industry, that it just compounds on itself. You start seeing new holes open up everywhere. So just getting that starting little point, instead of wasting a lot of time just iterating on ideas that the big companies are just going to dominate you on, can give you a big head start in entrepreneurship.
Yeah, that's actually great advice. Kind of depending on what you want to do, the complexity, the barriers to entry, consider working at a high level with an organization and really gaining all that experience. That's really practical advice. I've heard it before. I actually read it in an article. I think it was a founder of one of the largest private equity firms. He didn't. I'm forgetting the name of the firm right now, but essentially it was some advice he got to wait until he was in his later 30s, early 40s before jumping into something, because it's going to let you build your commercial network. You're going to have some level of significance and authority in that space. And now, not to say that's the only strategy, but it's one that on the surface, it has a lot of practical, elements to it that make a lot of sense.
Yeah. And they say entrepreneurs are risk takers, but by and large, we're all pretty risk averse. We wait till you theoretically should wait till you have an opportunity, you have a backstop. If you're an expert in your space, you probably have worked in that space, hopefully, for a long time. You could always go work there. You wait for that opportunity where it's going to be something. At the very worst, it's not, and you can go back into something amazing. I think that is a lot of entrepreneurs out there. They really have comfortable, even the youngest ones. If you're 22 years old, by and large, those entrepreneurs have some sort of backstop around them, whether that be family, or they, won some kind of award, or they, made money in Wall Street bets. They have something around them that keeps them able and risk averse enough to like go into a venture on their own. And I would that's why I think people in their 30s and 40s do a great job, is because they have the safety net of, yes, I can always go back and work here, but this idea is amazing. I'm passionate about it. I'm just going to dive into it and make it happen.
Oh yeah, big time, 100%. Now, is there a business tool that you love using?
Man, I wish I had an answer. No, I don't like any of the tools I use. I mean, Gmail and Zoom are probably the two that I use way too much, and I hate them both. And I think there's so much innovation that can come in business tools, especially virtually. I just, the level of organization, sorry, the level of software usage in management tools right now is out of control. Like my company probably has 30, from Asana to Slack to Discord to Telegram. Like we just use so many different things. I just got a new one today. Someone needs to fix all this. There's too many tools out there. They all marginally add something to it. I really wish I had one tool that I just went to all the time. But my recommendation to most people who are running companies is early on, force people to use just one or two things. If it's just Slack, everyone internally on Slack, everyone externally Gmail, fine. Or if it's just one thing, just pick one thing that everyone uses, because soon enough you'll have hundreds of people using different Kanban boards and message boards and postings on all kinds of different softwares. And you don't want that. And it gets really, really hard to fix once it's already gone.
Yeah, I can imagine. I can definitely imagine. Too much, too many applications, and you kind of get lost in it in some way, shape, or form.
Yeah.
Um, here's a bit of a curveball. If you had to go back and you couldn't work in the beverage industry whatsoever, you had to take an entirely different path coming right out of law school, what would you have done?
It's a good question. I am such a go with the flow guy. I just see what happens, that I never really knew. If I had to choose out of law school, knowing everything I know now, I probably would have gone into marketing.
Mm.
I, as a lawyer, and also a little bit too much of a realist probably at the time, I did not appreciate the value of brands or the value of brand building or consumer loyalty to brands and like the way it speaks to people. I learned that at TapRm on the go and from a lot of just being wrong. Um, if I had, I think smart people, I think there are a lot of smart people in marketing, don't get me wrong, but I think a lot of times the ones that are most mathematical or statistical, or the developers, the engineers, they tend to gravitate towards other fields for whatever reason. I think there's a lot of very mathematical stimulation that can come from marketing today that is being untouched. And I still think marketing is being done a lot of off the cuff. Like there are still, digital marketers do a good job with what they're doing. The A/B testing is there, but I think there's a lot of room to blow up that space just by understanding audiences and brand connections better. And because to this day, Super Bowl ads are still made by agencies who have ideas and pitch them in front of CEOs. That's crazy, right? Like we really should, we're at an age and a generation where this stuff could be way more technically advanced. And if I had to do it again, and that space is huge, there's a lot of money in it, I think I would want to dive into marketing a lot more. I think it's a really cool space. And I think there's a lot more to understand that's untouched right now.
That's phenomenal. Really good insight right there. I haven't thought of it in that depth and breadth until you started speaking about it. I want to thank you so much for your time, Jason. Really enjoyed having you here. Like to hand it off to you, and please share a final takeaway and a good way for people to get in touch with you or your organization, and keep following what you're up to.
Yeah, I mean, please find me on LinkedIn, Jason Sherman, TapRm, TAPRM. I try and answer every LinkedIn message if I can. I'd love to connect. Absolutely can find us. Also, if you love beer, if you want to order beer on taprm.com, TAPRM.com, you definitely should. We welcome all new customers all the time. We have some great products. But otherwise, thank you so much. I appreciate being on here, Eamon. And I appreciate the great questions.
Yeah, my pleasure. Talk to you soon.
Talk to you soon. Thanks a lot.
Yeah. Thanks for attending the Business Podcast and stay tuned for more episodes.